Okay, I'm going to take a moment just to talk about common mappings, which are in the resources folder, common mappings. These basically describe the button layouts of different controllers, and when someone connects a controller, these will be checked and can be used. So as you can see, it's by operating system and controller type. So this is the Xbox 360 on OS X, and this is the binding that it uses. So it's got an A button, which is Unity thinks is button number 16, and we give it a display name as well. So basically this means that because this is set up, if you've got in your control scheme a button that uses A, I think it would be jump in this, yeah. When someone plugs in an Xbox 360 controller on OS X, it will know which button is A and be able to set a default binding for that. So the player won't have to set up binding themselves. The controller should just work right away. Now there's bindings for a few controllers, and some of them will work across different drivers, for example. But if there's not something listed, you may need to set up your own common mapping. I will be adding to these as I will hopefully be adding to these as people make common mappings and send them to me. So if you do make a common mapping for a gamepad, you send it to me and I can include it in future versions of Sinput, and then people who use Sinput with that gamepad, it'll work by default. But like I say, it's only really for just the convenience of a gamepad working first time. You know, as long as the rebinding is in the game, any gamepad will work. It just needs to be have its bindings set. So if you are going to make your own common mapping, which I do advise against, to be honest, it's quite a mess. I've included, don't need to maximize that right now, goodbye. I've included this Gamepad Testing scene, which basically tells you the state of all of the connected gamepads. So if I start wiggling my buttons and sticks on my PlayStation controller, you can see that the name is listed, which buttons are pressed, and all of the axis values. And you'll just use that to say PS4 when that happens to be exactly the controller that we're using. You punch in the operating system, the name that is reported, partial names, so if you want it to apply, if there's not an exact match, you could try PlayStation, PS4, Sony, things like that. And you know, so we've learned that if I push the X button over here, we see it's 1. So 1 is A, because this is Xbox layout, but we're using our PlayStation controller, so 1. The display name is cross. And axis, it works largely the same, although it's a bit more complicated because axes can be strange. So if I wiggle the left stick, I can see it goes, if I move it left, it goes negative, so I need to invert it. All of these values should return positive, and be clamped 0 to 1, so that if I move it right, it's not going to start giving any other values. And I can see that it's axis 1 that is moving, so I specify 1 there, and the dead zone as well, so it counts as like a pressed button if the value is greater than 0.4. So not pressed, not pressed, not pressed, pressed, like that. That is that, I think. It's kind of a pain, and you'll probably want to test your common mapping to make sure that it's working with your gamepad, but that's how it's done.